Well, hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. Today we are filled with questions. Why would Donald Trump change his mind about the situation in Ukraine? Why would Canada and other countries decide to recognize a Palestinian state that doesn't really exist and they haven't met any of the conditions laid out? Why would the federal government decide that it wants to jump into the middle of a debate over the notwithstanding clause? I am just puzzled on so many fronts today. So I've gathered together our gang of very, very smart brains to help us all walk through it. Margaret McCuaig-Johnston, expert on Canada-Chinese relations, a senior fellow for the Institute for Science, Society and Policy, the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Ottawa. Mark Norman, senior defense strategist at Samuel Associates. He was, of course, 40 years in the military and served as the vice chief of the defense staff of Canada. Welcome to you, Mark. And Tasha Kheiriddin, journalist, policy analyst, lawyer. She has just recently become a fellow at Carleton University's graduate program in political science, the Clayton H. Riddell program. So welcome. It's great to see you. Yes, congratulations, Tasha, on all of that. So let's start with all these questions, and I want you geniuses to help me out. So we know that Mr. President Trump changes his mind regularly. What do you think caused it at the UN this week that Russia is now a paper tiger? It can't win a war. It's a loser. And Ukraine, if Europe does the right thing, should be able to win all its land back. Who wants to start? Margaret, why don't you take us?
Go, Margaret.
Thanks very much. Well, I was very encouraged to hear this partial about face. The president said that Ukraine can win this war, can in fact get all of its territory back. He even suggested they could get Russian territory, which they don't
Yes, he
did. But he said that would be with EU or European support. He didn't say NATO. And so that really means the Europeans need to step up in a more forceful way if that's going to happen. At the same time, he also said that other members of NATO should feel free to shoot down any Russian missiles, drones, whatever that come into their territory, which I think is right. I mean, they do need to do that. They would always be careful not to inadvertently start World War III. The one thing that I thought in his remarks was dangerous was to taunt Putin, to say, he could have won this war in a few days if he had been a strong leader, if Russia were a strong country, but instead he's a loser.
Yeah.
So that's really, Putin would not see that very positively and might choose to step up his attacks in Ukraine to show that he's not a loser.
Yeah,
that's what really
he's suggesting with all the stuff he said about the economy and losing Russian oil sales and losing so many thousands of people that he probably can't do that anymore. He can have incursions into airspace, but it's more symbolic than it is real. Is that realistic, do you think?
We'll see. I defer to Mark on that.
Okay, Mark, you jump into this whole thing. I mean, the cynics say, look, it was easy for him to say because he just wants Europe to buy more American defense and military product, and that's his contribution and step up. It's part of his argument about pay your bills at NATO and take responsibility. This is in your backyard, not mine.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot here, and I don't want to spend the rest of the hour talking about this specifically, but Margaret's made a series of really good points. And if we can just let's dispense with the psychoanalysis that is so seductively attractive in terms of why he flip-flops on these issues. And just look at it. So he has said all along that the United States is not there to fight Europe's wars. Okay, fine. And however we want to interpret that. I think the view that this is good for the U.S. Arms manufacturers is it's simplistic and cynical. The Europeans are really stepping up now, and they have their own competencies and capacities, which are as good and in some cases better. So I think, from a macro strategic perspective, this is a positive development. I think in terms of, the goating of Putin, I agree completely with her, Margaret, that as is typically him, he could have actually declared success at the 90% point, but then he just had to double down on something, silly or stupid, to put it bluntly. And so, okay, fine. I think the Russians are increasingly desperate. I don't think that is a stretch of anyone's imagination. I've been saying this all along. They are running out of a lot of things. Yeah. Money and people being the two biggest resources. And this is not sustainable. And, we did have a wobble. We had a serious wobble there a little while ago. Nobody was really sure. But I think if the West in general, Europe, Canada, and others are prepared to continue to stand by Ukraine as we have been, I think the outcome of this will be different than perhaps some people were imagining. An ugly path to get there, but I think we're in the right place. Thanks.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to your point, Margaret, that it is at some point the West has to draw red lines, and we kept shying away from it, but we seem to be getting closer now to actually saying there are lines over which you cannot cross, Mr. Putin. Tasha, I think because you've written about it so recently, I'm just going to go to you, because the other issue that's just out there is what has prompted Mark Carney, but also France and the UK to move precipitously on recognizing a Palestinian state. When Mark Carney first said this in July, he said, but only when these conditions are met and hostages are released and there's some kind of government to do business with. And then they all just kind of did an about face. What's your thinking?
Well, I'm thinking first it's a mistake. I think it's something that the government is doing for reasons that have nothing to do with doing the right thing or supporting our allies. In fact, if we unpack it, we can see that we are actually antagonizing our main ally. Like it or not, the United States is still our main ally. And that's been made very clear. The U.S. administration is not on board the recognition of Palestine as a state. Neither, mind you, are other allies of ours and other G7 countries. Germany and Italy and most of Europe actually are not recognizing. Japan, South Korea, Singapore in the East, most of Oceania. It is a majority of countries, yes, at the UN, but we also know what that means. A majority of countries at the UN sit on very different political sides of the West and of the free world, as we still like to call it. So I think here what you're seeing is playing to a domestic audience by a number of players. I hate to say that about our own government, but I will. In France, Macron is playing. He has a budget coming up soon. He's got to get the left on board. His government is very shaky. It's not going to pass otherwise. Keir Starmer, we know, has a lot of issues, and most of those are also internal in the Labour Party of pretty hard left MPs who wanted him to take this stance. He had recently the forced resignation of one of his ministers over a scandal. His party's, it would be defeated today by the Reform Party, Nigel Farage, if an election was held. So he's got issues there. And here at home, who can forget then Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly, when she famously said, well, look at the demographics in my riding, when she was asked about the government's stance on Israel and Palestine, and her riding has 7,000 people of Middle Eastern origin in it demographically. So, I do think there's domestic politics being played here by the federal government. It is really unfortunate. And I think also that the United Nations happened to be having its General Assembly just this week. So I think there was a desire to use that platform, the most powerful or visible platform anyway, maybe visible in the world, for the recognition of a state like Palestine or any other state, frankly. And I think that, it was decided, let's get together there. And also, Mark Carney likes to be in step with the Europeans. We know this. He's trying to diversify markets, but at the same time, we just got a letter.
Non-European countries, right?
Yes, we are. But we just got a letter from 25 Republicans who said, senators and others who said, this is not on. There are going to be punitive measures potentially taken against Canada and the other states that have signed on to this. So we're biting one hand that we need to feed us. That's going to be renegotiating CUSMA that still has tariffs on our economy to please another hand that is just, a possibility of expanded trade, but nothing yet. So I don't think this was the right call.
All of the potential trade that we talk about, whether it's critical minerals or LNG that we would be selling and offering up to Europe, we can't get out of the ground here or transport it to where they need it. So that is not a bird in the hand.
No, it's a bird it's still flying around up there, and we're trying to catch it. It would be nice, but even for all these other these tactical reasons, I think the right thing to do would not have been to recognize Palestine, because it is rewarding Hamas and it is doing exactly what you said, not fulfilling the basic conditions that were set out in the first place.
Mark, I want to go to you on this, but also hear from you. I mean, the Prime Minister also mused that we would be at some point possibly sending in Canadian troops to create the peace. There's no peace to keep. He made the same promise about going to Poland and Ukraine and others. Take them in order and let us hear your view.
Yeah, well, first of all, I would echo everything Tasha just said about this. I just for the record, I think this is a myopic, short-sighted, and very dangerous flip-flop. In fact, I think this is a bigger flip-flop than the opening story about Ukraine. And it's because it is enabling the illegitimacy of an organization that we are trying for political purposes to make legitimate, to make a short-term problem go away. And it's gonna create more long-term problems. But let's just park that as context for my reaction to your main question. Look, I genuinely believe that the Prime Minister wants Canada to help in a lot of these circumstances. The reality is, other than writing checks, which I think is becoming increasingly difficult, and the budget will probably reinforce that view, we don't have a lot of capacity to offer here. And unless we plan on moving the 2,500 roughly troops out of Latvia that are pretty much based there, I'm going to say semi-permanently.
Yeah, for sure.
There's not a lot of options here, notwithstanding the fact that, we should be able to do more, and that if we are going to make proclamations, as we are doing, as flawed as they might be, we at least need to be able to stand behind them. This is a Potemkin armed forces that we have in place at the moment. It is trying to do its best. The money is not flowing yet. The government is making some innovative decisions around some key purchases. Okay, fine, but look, we are a decade away from having even the basic capacity that we would have had 10, 15, 20 years ago to be able to respond to these kinds of things. So I don't believe that it is knowingly hollow that we are making these offers, but it is concerning because I just don't see the capacity being there.
Yeah, he should know this. He's spent the last 6 months looking at every detail of this in terms of promising Canada would beef up its defense spending and all of that. So it's not that he hasn't seen the file of late. to know where we're at. Margaret, there'll be consequences, no doubt, as we've heard from a lot of Americans already, but also the Israelis. I mean, they changed the website here in Canada, we are told yesterday, to say that our embassy is now located in Israel and Palestine. And I don't know, I just saw it. I saw it referenced on X, but these are, that would fall into the category of provocative, one would think.
Absurd.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I agree 100%. Margaret, go.
Well, I think another way of looking at this, and I don't disagree with the points that Tasha and Mark have made, very good points. A two-state solution is the policy we've had since 1947. And as the Prime Minister said at the UN, he is seeing that being steadily eroded, the possibility of a two-state solution. And if you look at Gaza right now, that whole territory is devastated. I don't see how anyone can ultimately live there. And we see increased settlements being planned in the West Bank. This was more, I think, the only diplomatic signal that they are able to give at this point, that Canada doesn't like the genocide, as some have called it, in Gaza, and the plans for the West Bank. And so I think it's kind of raising a big red flag by Canada that this is not the desired direction, and saying the ideal would be a Palestinian government.
But Margaret, let me ask it this way, because that is exactly what Mark Carney said in July. We want to send up this diplomatic symbol by saying, if and when we will consider recognizing them if conditions are met, but no conditions are met, and we still went ahead.
That's right. And so he did, lay out what the conditions are in terms of good governance, elections, no
hostages, get the hostages back. Yeah.
Having said all of that, I think it's too late. I don't see this as happening, frankly, unless there's pretty soon a regime change in Israel, and I don't see that happening unless Trump flip-flops again, in this case on Israel, and I don't see where the nudge for that would come from. I think Canada is sending up flags of concern and the ideal that we would like to see, but I think at this point that ideal is naive.
Yeah. Tasha, let's come back a little closer to home here. As somebody who covered the constitutional wars of the early 80s, dating myself, we're far too young to do it, but many of us lived through all these moments and realized that there would not be a repatriated constitution and a charter of rights in this country had there not been the compromise of the Alberta amending formula, but most importantly, the notwithstanding clause. And premiers from my side of the world, from Western Canada, made that, saying that Parliament should always be supreme when it comes to ensuring and protecting people's rights. Why do you think Ottawa has decided, in my mind, at a time when they need the provinces more than ever, to wade into a battle, which they will clearly have now with premiers like Quebec and premiers in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Ontario? What's the purpose of this?
Well, the notwithstanding clause was, as you said, the compromise solution to getting the Constitution, getting the Charter forward, because otherwise it was felt that Ottawa would have too much power, and we are a federation. And it was actually originally used, as you point out, by Western governments used it, and then Quebec decided to use it a lot, and then Ontario decided to use it, and it's become almost now, I would say, de rigueur, as you would say in French. Quebec has a possible prohibition on praying in public that's going to be debated this fall, and I guarantee you in that bill there's going to be inserted a clause that this is the notwithstanding clause applies to it, because otherwise it's going to be challenged. So it's become used preemptively, and I think that might be why the federal government is saying like no more, like no, and for the federal government to use it though is an interesting thing, because it was not designed for the federal government. It was designed to be the opposite. To protect the problem. So if the federal government starts using the notwithstanding clause, that's where we get into very strange places, because it's almost using it against itself. I do not know why they want to go down the road of discussing this and its potential use at this time, because it is one of those, every time you start talking about the Constitution, people's eyes glaze over one, and it's a cul-de-sac, constitutional amendment and the use of the Constitution as an instrument of lawfare or anything else, it loses the public. And I feel that it's a strange battle to be waging right now. I agree. I don't know why they're doing it specifically, other than they think they have to, but I think that it's not a wise fight to pick right now.
It struck me because the Prime Minister said on a couple of occasions that, in the face of our dealings with the U.S. and trying to renegotiate the NAFTA agreement, the USMCA, CUSMA, the deal with many names, that, Canada could become its own best customer, and all we have to do is take down the interprovincial borders and we will charge forward. So again, it puzzles me, and I don't know what your thoughts on this are, Mark, about it. It seems, again, a provocative move with the players he needs. Western Canada, Quebec going into election. Any thoughts there, Mark?
Yeah, well, I have some. I mean, it's not really my lane, but I'll offer two perspectives. The first one is that is it some sort of test for a future use? And this is one of the things I'm grappling with. But the only kinds of, you mentioned negotiations in the United States. I don't know. I don't really see how it could. I can see the unity piece, but if we were in a different conversation, if we were trying to build a pipeline across the country, for example, let's use a practical example here.
Right.
Is there a place for this in that conversation, given that you can't get everybody on the same page? And I don't know. I'm not a constitutional expert, but
And you mean to allow the feds to act unilaterally, to say,
exactly,
go through your province and build the pipeline.
Right. That's exactly.
No evidence, but it's a theoretical. Yeah.
Right. And so, you spend a lot of time in the military planning things that you may not ever do. Perhaps this is some of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes. And there's a bit of a, putting some thought bubbles out there to see what reactions there are. I that's a scenario that I can imagine, but I have difficulty imagining it with this particular government.
Yeah.
There's a lot of political capital being put on the table here, potentially, for something which is not typically aligned with their interests. So that one, I put that out there as an idea, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I agree fundamentally that this is a time when we really all need to be on the same page. And would we want to try and start, some sort of constitutional battle, as Tasha said, as interesting as it would be for the 17 people that would actually be following it?
Yeah, for Tasha and I, we would find it interesting.
Well, you're two of the 17 then.
The Geek Squad will be there for this away. Yeah.
So I'm like, really now with all the other things we have, unless we want to build a pipeline as a specific example, at which point I'd go, okay, but I don't see this government being.
No, I don't see that as a priority item. So Margaret, go for it. Explain it all.
Yeah, so let me begin by saying my first 8 years in government were in the Ontario government in federal provincial relations, and I was part of the negotiations from 1977 to 1980 on expanding provincial jurisdictions and in areas like culture and communications. At the same time, I have a few other hats that I wear. I've been on the Canada Committee of Human Rights Watch for 13 years. I'm on the board of the Human Rights Action Group, which is a group of lawyers taking international rights courses. And I fundamentally agree with the principle of universal rights, as in the UN Charter. So it concerns me deeply to see the notwithstanding clause being used, as it has been a number of times, with respect to rights. So I think, this is something that I think the federal government has pointed to the important role that the Supreme Court plays in looking retrospectively at provincial legislation to determine, is it repeatedly being used against things like rights in Canada, to repeatedly use the notwithstanding clause in that case. And I think the Supreme Court is the right place to do that. But I think Mark suggests an interesting principle of, the pipeline and what would happen there. And I think Tasha makes a good point in terms of taking on the U.S. on this file.
So Margaret, the federal government is actually, they explain they're just interveners in this case about some actions on the part of Quebec. And of course, the law against wearing religious symbols into work. At the same time, we're seeing Ottawa put forward legislation that is going to impose some pretty serious legal penalties, judicial penalties for people using symbols of what they describe as hate. And I'm just wondering if somehow they're looking for a backdoor there.
That's interesting. I don't think so. I think we would have
don't think so
already.
Either, but I'm looking.
Frankly, I think we do need to strengthen the rules and legislation around hate symbols and so on. Anti-Semitism has been rising dramatically in this country. Mm-hmm. It's very, very concerning, and it seems that we need stronger legislative frameworks to tackle that, and we need to do that now before it expands even further.
All right, before we've got a little bit of time left here, Tasha's going to run off and jump on an airplane. Good luck with that.
I'll sniffle the whole way. The poor people there with me. I'll wear a mask. I'll be good.
Yeah, you'll be. Let's just take a look at a little bit more of the domestic stuff. Again, because I come from Saskatchewan, the gun control debate is part of my life and my psyche. And here we have the Minister of Public Safety, who's been in hot water on a couple of other issues before, including his past affiliations with what might be described as terrorist organizations, although in a legal capacity, kind of putting his foot in it on gun control, Tasha, and just saying, we're going to go ahead with this law. We know it won't really work. And the cops probably won't have time to enforce it, but we will send people to jail if we want to. But never mind, it's all about politics in Quebec.
I know.
How does this man have a job?
I don't know. There was the Conservatives in their, pithiness yesterday sent out emails from their press secretary. Fire Gary. They won't even use his last name is very long. And as someone with a last name that's hard to pronounce, I do feel for him. But even I have issues with it. So what you're seeing here is a rookie cabinet minister making a serious mistake. You do not record.
He's not that rookie. He's been around. Yeah.
He's been around, but in this capacity, this is a big file, and he should not have been mouthing off on a phone call that he did not. You always assume someone could be recording you,
right?
To say those things so candidly, especially about the electorate in Quebec. A lot of our voters are people who support us live there. It's not good to admit that it won't work. It basically played into the opposition's hands. And he's right, though. This is the irony, is that this probably won't work. It won't. What it won't do is tackle the real issues people have around crime. Things like home invasions, feeling unsafe in public spaces because there are mentally ill people committing crimes and people on bail who are coming out again, and, unsafe transit.
There are places in your own driveway at gunpoint or
yes, and then the guns. The guns these people are using are not going to be turned in. The criminals are not going to go for the buyback because they make more money using the gun than turning it in. So this whole project is not going to affect the crime people are experiencing. And that's where I think it's interesting to see how it could blow back on the government in a way it didn't previously. Gun control has always been a big issue for the Liberals. It worked for them in the 2021 election with O'Toole. They played that card the last parts of the election, and it worked. They got more votes on that basis, scaremongering the Conservatives are gun nuts, et cetera, et cetera. But right now, I think it won't work because it's money that's being spent for no result, and people are tired of that. So I think they're on thinner ice here than they have been. And the minister, they're certainly skating around on very thin ice right now.
Yes, in trouble for telling the truth. That's an interesting concept.
Basically.
Mark, jump ahead.
Yeah, so this was a missed opportunity for the new government. Okay, and I don't want to talk about the mistakes of the minister and what was said or not said. Just look at this from a macro perspective. They had an opportunity to politically undermine another key position from their conservative critics, and to kind of take a more pragmatic approach to this whole thing. And they chose not to. They chose to double down on what is fundamentally flawed policy and legislation. And now I think they got themselves stuck. I agree completely that this is not the solution to the problems that Canadians actually want fixed. Now, that doesn't mean that everything that a government does is necessarily should follow public opinion. But in this particular case, people have been saying all along, you're trying to fix the wrong problem. And in fact, it's not even a problem. And, I've always had an issue with the characterization of these long guns, as they're called, these assault type rifles. There's no such thing. It's either an automatic weapon or it's not an automatic weapon. What it looks like is absolutely irrelevant, and that has undermined the validity of what they're trying to achieve. I think the police in this country could and have offered the governments of the day advice on how to deal with some of these underlying systemic criminal issues, and we just don't seem to be prepared to back away from what are, I think, completely out of date and flawed policies. I'm disappointed because Anyway.
Everybody with any common sense is just saying the criminals who are using illegal guns brought in across the border are not going to be participating in this program.
Right, exactly. And oh, by the way, they're not carrying the kinds of weapons that you folks are obsessed with, to put it bluntly. And so this is, with all of the issues they're trying to manage, again, I go back to, really? This is something that you want to double down on at this moment in time?
No, because the provinces, some of them are just saying we won't let you in here with your expert, to get the guns. Margaret, let me go to you because, of course, pardon me, this minister is not going to resign today or be fired, because that would be a win for the opposition, so they won't. But we're seeing the old Trudeau bench, which is the current Carney bench, kind of fleeing for diplomatic posts as quickly as they can. These folks just won an election, promising their constituents they would be there for them. And it kind of, that's one of the issues. The other issue is, should we just be putting former politicians who need a job in key diplomatic posts when we need relations with other parts of the world more now than ever? What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, I'm old enough to remember that if a government official made a mistake in a department, the minister stepped down.
Yeah, ministerial responsibility. Yeah.
Exactly. And in this case, I can't imagine a case study being presented to a class of politicians on what not to do that's as obvious as this one. This is a fundamental case of misjudgment. You can't say one thing about your own government policy to a friend and offer to bail them out with your own cash. I mean, we've had cases where people had to step down for doing that in past governments, and then turn around and say you're introducing this bill and not planning to resign. This not only was a huge case of misjudgment, but it sapped out a lot of the oxygen of yesterday's media coverage when the Prime Minister wanted to be focused on a whole series of things that he was doing at the UN. And this was taking up time. This Prime Minister is known to have a short fuse. I expect that he's furious. He's very busy. There are a number of important international meetings on at the UN this morning and here in Ottawa this afternoon with the leader of Indonesia. But I expect that he's been talking to his staff about how to give this guy the hook, because you cannot expect this kind of performance on the part of an important. This is a really important minister, public safety, for heaven's sake.
Exactly.
And at the time when other ministers, as you say, or other MPs may be moving on to other posts, this is an opportunity for a mini cabinet shuffle, and another opportunity for Carney to put his own look on cabinet. Maybe bring in some people from the private sector who haven't yet been elected. That's been done before. And so this is an opportunity. I'm not a fan of politicians being put in diplomatic posts. We've got a phenomenal ambassador to the United States who's a career diplomat. And she has been outperforming every other diplomat on the planet, I think, in a very, very tough job. And that's the kind of model I think we need to be going for.
But there will be no cabinet shuffle, one assumes, before the November 4th budget, should that date hold, because he needs every vote he can get. He's still in a minority government, right?
Yes, that's a really important point. You're right. Yes, unless he can bring in cabinet ministers, but you're right that if you don't have the seats in the House, you're in trouble. And just speaking about that, I was surprised that we didn't see on the first day of Parliament back a few floor crossers, people in the Conservative Party who wanted to join the winning team of progressive conservatives, because I'm seeing this Liberal government of Carney as progressive conservative, not.
There are some progressive conservatives that are not too keen about that characterization.
Yes, I'm sure that's the case. But anyway, we didn't. So they obviously all see themselves as the government of winning.
Tasha, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think there's going to be a cabinet shuffle either. I think that the anger, though, is probably palpable. And Carney does have, to Margaret's point, a known temper, and he doesn't suffer fools. So while he may not shuffle things ahead of the budget, which is coming up quickly, next shuffle, I suspect that Minister Gary could be shown the door. And I say that because public safety is also an incredibly important portfolio vis-a-vis the United States. We know border security, all these issues that are wrapped up in public security. Canada needs to be seen as, on top of its game. The big issue with the U.S. still is fentanyl in Donald Trump's mind. What are we doing to tackle that? The gun amnesty is not going to do that. It's not going to help with fentanyl. So I think that, I'm not sure who he'd put there. But in terms of shipping other people off to places, like sending Blair to the UK is a bit odd. A lot of people have said he's not the most diplomatic person to be a diplomat. So, in the scheme of things, is that going to what you were saying earlier is sending people off to other places sort of as a political reward, or to just move them out. Is that a smart move? I don't personally think so, unless it's the right person. And I don't necessarily think that. And the chatter I've heard is that that's not, he's not the smooth, suave diplomat that you might get if you think of other people that have been appointed in the past politicians like John Baird or others who had more of a way with people.
Yeah, the personality for
exactly.
that. Mark, a comment on that, but I also, just as our final word today, want to hear from you on, as the budget approaches, how optimistic you are that there might be some significant spending in the defense portfolio that's real, not just shifting around the activities of the Coast Guard so it gets us closer to the 3% and 5% NATO commitment. Do you think there'll be, and particularly in light of the Prime Minister's promises to put boots on the ground here, there, and everywhere, are you optimistic? What are you hearing about it?
Well, I'm not hearing much, and I'm not being coy about it. It's I think the bigger challenge for your listeners is the offering and committing more money that we can't spend is not a winning strategy. Okay, so I'm going to continue to be benevolent in my analysis of this government's commitment to increase defense spending. I think it's real, but I think the challenge is the mechanisms, processes, and capacities necessary to actually move the money. Pick up on something Margaret said earlier. I think, the Prime Minister, who is, let's be blunt here, personally managing many of the files that we would have imagined being managed by colleagues in cabinet. He is rapidly becoming the minister of everything important, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. However, it's going to lead to some tough conversations, and I think defense spending is going to be one of them. The thing about this is it's easily measurable. Yeah. You can't hide it. I think there are some huge challenges that have not necessarily been fully satisfied. I'm going to believe that the commitments to not just some of the large visible programs are going to be there, but I think that the long-term structural increases are going to be there. But we've got to move this money, and we have to move it responsibly. And that is the harder problem to fix. I think there's going to be some tough love at the same time in the budget. Nobody's necessarily going to be happy. I don't even think defense is going to be happy, because I suspect there will be some conditions placed on that in terms of how they behave. But that's a long rambling answer to your question.
Yeah, no, we're hearing all of this, that we're going to see massive investments like we've never seen before, which is, as a few people have said, will be a big whopping bill for the next few generations to pay, because it's still about spending money any way you look at it.
Yeah. And I do, look, I'm not, there's no taking sides here.
Yeah.
I do think it is important that when we look at, there is a difference between investment and spending, right? And that may have started as a political slogan or a bumper sticker, but there is actually some substance to that.
No, I agree.
And when we look at some of these large,
theoretically, that's true. We'll see if it comes out in practice.
Right, exactly. But we need, the government needs to. I think it needs to bring in some help to move some of this stuff, and it is not and cannot be business as usual, or we're not going to get where we need to be.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you all very much. We really covered the waterfront there, and we will reconvene after a budget at some point too to see where things are going. Mark, Senior Defense Strategist at Samuel Associates, Mark Norman, retired as Vice Chief of the Defense Staff of Canada. And we always and every week will thank you for your service. We really appreciate it. Margaret McCuaig-Johnston, expert on Canada and China. We didn't even get to that. The Prime Minister's openings to China in the last few days. She's Senior Fellow at the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs, the University of Ottawa, and Tasha Kheiriddin, the newly minted Fellow at Carleton University's Clayton H. Riddell Graduate Program in Political Management. We thank you all very much for your brain power and your contributions this morning. We'll see you all again soon, and we will see you all again very soon as well. That's it for this edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin.